Hello, hello, hello. I'm sorry, that wasn't very smooth and it was my fault. But I welcome you to Digital Production, Spring 2018 semester here in the DJD program, and so happy to be commencing this really exciting journey that we're going to be on for the next 4 months here in the course, learning a plethora, a bona fide plethora of digital production skills. We're going to talk about audio, about photography, specifically photojournalism, and we're also going to talk, of course, about video. And when I say we, I do mean we, because joined each week in the studio with me will be my co-collaborator, or one might just say collaborator. I don't think there's a co-collaborator.
Yes.
Professor Christopher Campbell.
Yes.
Some
may know.
Camp Bell, Professor Camp Bell, but
some may know. So who's in the class? I know some of the people who are in the class, but who else?
You think you do, but you may not.
No? Do I know anyone else?
Well,
in the class?
Scott is taking the class. Now, I don't know if you recall, but I think I said he came to the photo class. He came to, we have a week-long intensive
he came to that
course.
One? Which one? The first one
Over
or the
the
second
summer,
one?
recently, within the past few months. Don't worry. I'll show you his picture. I'm sure it'll all come.
If Scott's listening to this, I'm sorry.
Yes, he is.
I'm very, very sorry for not remembering who you are right away.
Maybe it was a little further back, come to think of it. It might have been during a winter session, but he came in. It was great. He showed us some clips that he's worked on.
Oh, was he a guest speaker?
He was, yes.
Oh,
yes.
Guest speaker. Oh, okay.
Yes.
And okay.
He's out in Orlando.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
So there you go, Scott. We remember.
Yes.
We remember you. Now, we have also a number of students in the class who are just starting their DJD experience, and I'm really excited because, all joking aside, we have a really impressive group of students in DJD coming in, students who are wrapping up their studies. The master's program, our online master's program, is really doing well. At least in terms of the caliber of students.
Oh, these are all the new that you were telling me about.
Yeah.
Well,
we have students who have a lot of experience with the very tools that we'll be talking about. We have students who have used analogous tools such as Final Cut Pro. Now we're very much focused on Adobe.
Analogous?
Analogous.
What?
Complementary.
Okay.
I'm foreshadowing some concepts.
I kept thinking of, for some reason, I had analog in my mind because we were talking about analog versus digital earlier.
Yes, and we will continue that.
Analogous, yes. I remember Final Cut Pro. I remember I learned Final Cut. I've learned editing on Final Cut Pro 7. That was my first. That's where I originally got my editing chops, so to speak. It was on the old Final Cut Pro 7.
Your maiden voyage on the old Final Cut 7.
Yes. And then there was a big, huge thing when Final Cut Pro 10 came out. And a lot of users were not happy. It was a huge kerfluffle.
Yeah, it
was a giant kerfluffle because everyone hated Final Cut Pro 10 because everyone was, and then really liked Final Cut Pro 7. And then Adobe had to catch up.
Yeah.
Because Adobe Premiere at the time was not nearly as good as Final Cut Pro 7. And now Adobe, Premiere, I would argue that it's basically Adobe Premiere and Final Cut are the major NLEs. I mean, there's obviously still Avid, but Avid seems to be more of a niche market, I would argue.
DaVinci Resolve.
Yeah, DaVinci Resolve, yes. Actually, it's some pretty exciting news with that because with the new version DaVinci Resolve 14, now is it not just a color grading program, but it's also a fully fledged editor and audio editor too. So
now, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but I do think, to a large extent, when you've learned one of these platforms.
It sounds scary, hyperbolic.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like an infection.
A little bit of hyperbole going on.
When you've learned one of these tools, you've learned a lot about all of the tools because the concepts are so similar. And I think that was part of why people felt a little agitated when Final Cut 10 first came out, because Apple eschewed a concept that was ingrained in people's mind in terms of how nonlinear editors work.
Well, they made it like it was originally kind of like iMovie,
Yeah.
and people didn't like.
Yeah.
People were not. It just. It was just the
felt,
one screen, with the one monitor,
constrained, the one monitor,
versus the source program and source and things like that at the same time. So that got to be a little. I think people were just annoyed with it to a certain extent, but now Final Cut Pro 10 actually is now it's becoming more popular again.
Yes. In this class, we do need to be clear that we're focused on the Adobe suite. We're going to talk about Audition, which is Adobe's flagship digital audio editing program. Photoshop, which of course is the world's preeminent image editing program.
Although there's other programs that are even nipping at Photoshop's tails.
Oh my.
Yeah, like Serif.
Uh-huh.
And and then there's other Lightroom versions that are Lightroom alternatives that are coming out that are free.
Yeah.
Actually, there was one called darktable.org, which I read about, and Capture One is becoming very, very popular as an alternative to Lightroom.
All right.
Because Lightroom can be slow sometimes. It's quite annoying, I have to admit. Obviously we use the Adobe Creative Cloud here in the studio, and I have to admit, Lightroom, unless you have a super fast computer, it's just really slow sometimes.
So, but let me ask you a personal question.
Personal?
Yeah, I just want to get a little personal here. But why, for you personally, coming from your own point of view, why is Adobe a good platform to really get to know well?
Well, the one advantage of Adobe is that you can install Adobe on basically any computer, except, although I did, when I started grad school here, there was one person I remember that tried to take video storytelling using a netbook. A netbook.
A netbook?
Yes. I remember, yeah. Ricardo has his headphones on, but he's not listening. But he remembers that because he was in the same.
Oh, okay.
The same class.
There's someone else for a moment, but
there's someone else in the studio also, but he never says anything. He's very quiet. To date.
He
refuses to say anything. Someday, maybe. But yeah, someone actually tried to edit on a netbook, which was a complete disaster.
All right. Well,
but
short of that, you could install it on a lot. You
can install it on a Mac or a PC.
Cross-platform, obviously.
I've seen it installed on i3 computers, and it's actually worked.
And then we also have the integration factor, right?
Yes,
the
dynamic linking. Yes,
it's that integrated workflow where you start in one program and you seamlessly transition to another.
It's one complete ecosystem, which is very, very nice. It's all dynamically linked, so you can do your primary editing in Premiere, and then you can do your audio editing in Audition, and then you can do your motion graphics in After Effects. You can do your well, they had something called SpeedGrade, which was like their version of for color grading, but they actually have basically not supporting it anymore because they've added the Lumetri color effect within Premiere.
Yeah.
But you can do all your image editing in Photoshop. It's all, or you can import Illustrator files. You can do just about anything. So it's very, very nice. That's when, I mean, honestly, for example, like DaVinci Resolve sounds like a really great. The new version sounds really, really great because DaVinci Resolve has such a powerful color grading features, but it's still, even though it does have the complete editor now and also audio editing, like for example, any kind of image editing, you still have to use either Adobe Camera Raw if you're using Raw or Photoshop or Lightroom, or Bridge or all these other kind of things. So it's not quite so totally, completely there yet. Although someone may be listening and using DaVinci Resolve and maybe say that I'm full of it.
If that's you, please, by all means, chime in through one of our discussion forums. Of course, Cafe has made a triumphant return this semester.
Cafe.
I think it's always been there, actually. But we have the course Cafe. I need to invite you to the course. It's a cafe.
That's like a coffee drink, right? You mean like a cafe latte? A latte? A latte? A coffee?
This is a place, a
Coffee.
virtual space. It's a virtual coffee shop. You would like
Virtual
it.
coffee shop.
Not quite as good as an actual coffee shop.
So I wonder when people who haven't taken any of this class, or is this? I wonder are there people that are taking this is their very first class in the DJD program?
Yes, there are people who are beginning, and
They
so,
may be quite perplexed by all this. What's going on here?
Yes. If I could ask another personal question, is it possible? And I know based on prior knowledge of what's gone down here today that it may not be, but what would happen? Let me put it that way: if we switch to your camera.
Well, I have disabled it
Completely.
I just deleted the shot.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's okay.
And
do we have? So, in other words, this camera is just going to be on me the whole time.
Well, I could try adding it, but I don't want to freeze. I don't want it to freeze and we would have to start over again.
If you would, could you please switch to my laptop?
Oh, your laptop. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Whoosh.
Your laptop. Oh, there it is.
Okay. We'll work on that timing. So, yes, it is the spring 2018 semester. This is a contemporaneous experience that we are bringing to you here. And we have a lot to get to. We really do. So we need to dive into it. And we're going to talk about, in fact,
and we're going to stick to the time constraint, right?
Yeah, we have there's a timer here.
How much time do we have?
We have an hour and something, but less than an hour and a half.
Okay.
We have 10 different things that we want to talk about today, including what we're doing right now, which is our introductory shenanigans.
So, okay. So can I switch back to you
want to come
now?
back to you? May.
Yeah, because that's just part one introduction.
That's
fairly
there's
boring.
not much there. Oh, there we go. Yes. So hello, everyone. I'm Casey Frechette. I am the instructor.
I thought they already knew that.
I'm sorry. Oh.
I thought they already knew that.
Well, yes, but I hadn't formally introduced myself.
Oh.
And when you were saying people may be feeling perplexed and whatnot, I was feeling like I hadn't done a good job being a host for the class here. So I just wanted to officially introduce myself.
Well,
hello,
yes.
everyone.
And at some point, I will get a camera. But part of the mystery is what's the? There's always the person behind the voice. Every TV show, every whatever it is, there's always it adds a little bit of mystery.
True.
Kind of a thing.
And even for people who have seen you, they don't know what you look like today in the middle of January 2018.
Well,
they don't understand.
Except one person who was in my class last night.
Even that person doesn't know what you look like today.
Yeah.
So the mystery remains.
Yeah.
All right. So, so I mentioned the three things. There were two important ideas I wanted to get across in the introduction. Number one, this class is about photo, video, and audio. And it is very much a technical, technology-driven class. And we are going to be using a variety of tools and techniques to hone our technical skills. This is not a theory class, not a conceptual class, although we'll bring in some concepts to the extent that they help us to be better at our work in the field and at the editing.
I'm sure that certain TV shows will be mentioned throughout the semester.
Well, we have our favorites.
Yes, yes.
We do, and movies as well.
Yes.
We were just talking about Nebraska.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody has seen Nebraska, but
well, you were talking about how it was a black and white. And,
it was either released earlier this year or maybe last year.
Yeah, I think it was last year.
It might have been last year, but it's a black and white movie set in the on location in Nebraska and Montana. Starts in Billings, Montana. But anyway, we'll bring in different examples and we'll take a look at them together here in the course. Game of Thrones may be something that comes up now and then.
Well, yes.
Better Call Saul.
Yes, and
Shows
there's some
of
other
that caliber. We are gentlemen of exquisite taste.
There's many new ones too. There's Mindhunter, which was supposed to be quite good. Oh, and then someone else in this class and I were having a discussion about Blade Runner, the new Blade Runner movie, which was incredible cinematography and absolutely incredible audio environment. Audio.
Really?
Yes, the audio environment, the sonic environment. It was excellent.
One of the great things, if I may say, about becoming, growing into this profession as a digital producer is you basically can watch movies and TV shows, you know, as part of your work. It's part of your job going forward, because we have a lot to learn from how others do this work, and studying the great directors of our times and studying the best TV shows that are out there right now, and there are some incredible TV shows, will inform the work that we do.
In fact, I would argue that it's necessary.
I would have to agree. I am not going to argue with your arguments.
I mean, it's just so you learn, and then when you start seeing these techniques and things like that, and it's pretty, you know, you're just you're like, wow, yeah, and then you start wanting to apply the technique in your own work.
And you can. It's eminently possible. You're not going to have the budget that Peter Jackson is going to have. You'll be a few dollars short of that. But we have never been able to create such high quality work with such little upfront investment. Would you agree?
Yes, although I'm just noticing the lighting on that one side is a little off.
Wait, it may be me. Am I?
No.
Should I? No?
No, it's on the other, it's on the background.
Oh, yeah.
Is it a little off, the brightness intensity?
Oh, this part right here?
No, yeah.
This
that's
here?
not right.
This,
Yeah,
so, like,
no.
well,
See, then you notice these little things too.
yes.
And then a lot of times, you know, you're pressed for time because it's no matter how early you get there, it seems like something always happens, and there's never enough time.
There's never enough time. And the pressure is
Never.
real.
Never.
And I know that you feel a certain amount of pressure because we're talking about lighting.
Well, and it's just because it's just bugging me. I can see it's a little off, and then the one side.
Would you like to come
is
up
not
and,
as bright
and
as the other.
rectify that?
No,
we can
because
take a
then-
moment if you'd like to. Come on up. Let's now. I can only block the camera so much here. Just don't look too carefully. We don't want. Okay. Yes. No. Well. Don't worry. You're protected.
Okay,
Now.
look at the camera. Hey, can you see?
Nope. Can't see you.
No. But look at the. Okay, get up.
I can't see what you were talking about. So. Well.
Nope. Okay, is that good? All right. Okay,
I think that's better. Yeah. How's that look?
yeah, hold on, one more thing.
Oh my God. All right. Whew. Now, there were two things. I've still only mentioned one, and we need to move on to part two. But number two is we're going to talk about what?
Part two? Okay.
No, not yet. Not yet.
No.
This is part two of part. This is part B of part one, and then we're going to go to part two.
Oh.
The other thing I want to say about the structure of the class, in addition to the three different realms that we're going to explore sequentially, we'll start with audio, then photo, then video, and build on that skill base. We're also going to be working through the entirety of the process, meaning we're going to begin with what is commonly known as the pre-production phase, which involves conceptualizing, planning, and organizing our work. Production, which of course is the actual producing part, capturing video, audio, and photography. And then of course, the ever popular, always necessary post-production phase, in which we use tools like Photoshop and the Lightroom and Premiere to...
It's and Lightroom, not the Lightroom.
I'm sorry?
And Lightroom, not the Lightroom.
Did I say the Lightroom?
Yes.
I don't think so. But
I think so.
the Lightroom, okay. Well, I use the Lightroom and I also use
The Photoshop?
the Photoshop. I think that's all I want to say for the introductory section of this, unless you have a thought you'd like to add.
About the
Overarching impressions about the class.
overarching impressions. Yes, very technical. Well, I think also the fact that a lot of these pre-production, production, and post-production stages will they kind of merge together sometimes too.
Yeah. We talk about them as if they're three distinct chapters in a project, but a lot of times you get to the end and you're like, oh boy, I need to go back and get a little extra.
Yeah, you need to get
there.
some pickup shots and
Yeah.
get some other things, and yeah, so that's what I would say about that.
And also, planning doesn't stop when you enter the production phase.
No, it never
planning
stops.
the whole way through.
Yeah, the
and
planning-
revising your plans and coming
Yes,
up with alternatives when things don't go according to plan.
Yes.
Which, of course, everything always goes according to plan.
Well, of course.
Hypothetically speaking, you know.
Yes, it always goes to plan.
Yes. All right. Well, let's come back to our
screen.
Let's see.
Wait, hold on. Oh shoot, I have too many mices and.
Oh, see, no, that, okay. We're gonna work on that.
have
It's
too
all
many
right. We
things.
have 10 lessons here, 10 parts, so we have plenty of opportunities to get that timing down. Part 2, sound and light. Now, what we want to cover in our introductory session here, you can come back to me.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much. What we want to cover in our this is week 2 in the course, but it's really our first in-depth look at the content of the course. And the goal here is to talk about overarching concepts in terms of digital technology, along with its analog forebearers. So we need to understand analog to really understand how digital works. And we want to really understand how digital works so that when we're making decisions out in the field and in post-production and even in pre-production, that we're doing things that are going to produce the best quality work. To do that, we really have to understand how our equipment works, how the technologies that we're relying on function. And so that's the goal here for this week in the course. The concepts we're going to talk about apply to everything from Premiere to DaVinci Resolve to Avid to all of the emerging photo editing programs that are coming up. These are essential and quintessential concepts in digital technology. So, sound and light is the idea that we want to tackle in this particular part. And the thing to know here is that it all comes down to waves. We have light waves and we have sound waves. And when we're talking about producing a piece of work, a recorded piece of work, it's all about capturing those waves. Both sound waves and light waves are part of an umbrella concept known as a sine wave. And that's S-I-N-E, a sine wave. Sine waves are particular kinds of waves that exist in nature and adhere to specific properties. Now, in addition to my handy-dandy slides here, I also have a little sketch pad that we're going to come to now and again.
Now, should I
for
warn
some
people?
artistic renderings.
What should I warn people about your handwriting?
You mean my exquisite penmanship?
Exquisite penmanship.
You may want to warn them because they may be blown away by the, especially my cursive. It's quite extraordinary. All right. Let's see here. Now, all right. Now, I am going to attempt to draw a sine wave. And we'll see how it goes. There's, okay, I'm feeling a little nervous, but we're going to see if we can make, now, let's just draw let's start with a line. We'll pretend that's a completely straight horizontal line. And along that line, I'm now going to draw the wave. I can barely keep my hand from shaking. I'm so nervous. Okay, well, it's not bad. I mean, it's not horrible. It's bad, but it's not horrible.
No.
This is a sine wave, and a lot of times in digital production and post-production, we see audio represented by these waveforms. I'm sure everybody has had the experience of looking at what's called a waveform, an audio waveform. And if you really zoom in on it, it looks something kind of like this. What you may not realize, or maybe you do, is that the physical properties of this wave, as they're depicted in our software, tell us something fairly important about the underlying sound that's been captured. And so, what does it tell us? Well, the distance from this middle line that I drew, this horizontal line, in other words, how high up we go and how far down we go, tells us about the amplitude of the sound. The further away from the line, the louder the signal is. And the distance from one peak to the next, or from one valley to the next, tells us something about the pitch of the sound. The greater the distance between one valley and the next, or one peak and the next, the lower the frequency. And the shorter the distance, the higher the frequency. So there's some important information here about how this sound actually works. Now, it's a little misleading when we represent audio in this fashion, because the truth is there's never just one single wave when audio is traveling through the ear. In fact, there are always overlapping waves, which may be similar and may be slightly different. This one is really pretty rough. But there you go. There's another sine wave overlapping with the first one. And these overlapping waves, which have the same two basic properties, pitch and amplitude, as they occur together, give us that wide spectrum of sound that we can hear. This is, in large part, what makes people's voices unique. If you think about it, we can play back. We don't have it queued up, so we can't actually do it. But
Well,
how many famous people, you play their voice, and everybody is going to instantaneously recognize who that is?
you can play it on your computer.
Perhaps I could.
You can bring it up, right?
I could do that. Yes, indeed. Let's do a little experiment here.
Oh,
We can-
is there?
Oh no! Don't look at me. Take it off.
Wait, is there?
We have to mask the behind the scenes. Yeah. See, this is why it's so essential that we get that second camera set up, because we'll have more options. Now, I have to think of this is the thing. There's so many I just said, but then okay. All right. Let's see. How about? Like, we're trying to think of somebody famous, and then nobody comes to mind.
Well, there's always the Darth Vader. Everyone, that's a very distinct voice.
True. Let's try. Well, I don't know if this is going to work. This is just. All right, let's see what happens here. Oh, there's a commercial, of course.
Is it playing? Wait.
It's a commercial for Grammarly.
Oh.
Oh my goodness. I just pulled up an entire movie. All right, so.
Well, everyone knows, like.
Okay, here we go.
Off to the White House.
All right.
Okay, so
Uh-oh.
Thought I could feel.
so then I'm going to switch.
You know the old.
Well, everyone knows, like,
Okay, here we go.
Off to the White House.
All right. Well, see, that didn't go well at all.
No,
because-
actually, no. Well, because
Our
your
voices,
microphone picked it up.
Yeah, okay. Did you recognize who it was?
Yeah, Al Pacino.
There you go. See?
But then I could see it on the.
Oh, you were looking at it. Well, that's kind of cheating. But the point being, let me close this down. The point being that, as I come back to my sketch pad, everybody has a unique voice. And even among billions of people, the voices of the people we know in our lives are instantaneously recognizable, which is kind of amazing if you think about it, because audio in the end can always be distilled to pitch and amplitude. But because of the way that our audio waves overlap with one another, you end up with these ultimately unique voice prints that everyone has. And this also gives us differences in musical instruments. A piano sounds different from a guitar. They're both stringed instruments. They both have qualities of pitch and amplitude, but the co-occurrence of these sound waves gives them their unique timbre, which is a different quality of audio. Is there anything, kind sir, that you would like to say about light waves before we move along?
You mean, well, in terms of audio, the person can hear between 20 hertz to 20,000 kilohertz.
All right. I think we're going to talk about that, in fact, when we get to...
Although, as you age, you lose that ability to hear the high ends and low ends. And so now the average, 40-year-old, I think, can hear up to 16,000, 15,000 kilohertz and
yes,
50 or 100 hertz.
Because of all those Metallica concerts.
Yeah, well, yeah. And supposedly your hearing does not grow back. Your hearing does not, it can't improve. It can only degrade
but
as
what
you get
about
older.
stem cells?
What?
Stem cells.
Well, I suppose.
Nanotechnology.
Yeah, right. So what about light?
What about light? Yes. Is there anything? Another thing I just want to briefly mention about these waves is they are physical, and they can also go from one physical medium to another. So in the case of audio requires a medium. It requires air to travel through. There's the old the understanding that there's no sound in space. Mm-hmm. It's a tremendous disappointment, but if you saw the recent Star Wars movie and you heard photons blasting at ships, that is pure Hollywood
Well, that's
magic.
Star Trek.
What? Photon? Wait, there are no photons in Star Wars?
Star Trek has photon torpedoes and phasers, and then Star Wars has lasers and missiles and bombs.
I'm deeply ashamed for that faux pas, and I apologize. But in both cases, if you're hearing it, that's not scientifically accurate.
Right. Although 2001 was one of the few movies that actually was realistic.
They had that classical music playing in space.
Well, no, there's a scene where the guy got sucked out into space or something like that, and there's no sound. So it was actually, completely realistic.
No sound in space because there's no air in space.
Right.
It's just a vacuum, and so the audio doesn't have a medium to travel through.
And then the for audio, the medium will determine the speed at which it travels through. So, for example, sound travels faster through water than it does through air. So that's why, or it amplifies it, something like that. So that's why when you listen to things underwater, they appear louder, and it carries the sound more. Something like that.
So the medium
changes,
distorts or influences.
It changes how the
sound.
It's just going to change the audio itself.
And here's where it really gets crazy. So the audio waves are traveling through a medium, the air, for example, but we can transpose them onto a different medium. And that's what happens when we're involved in analog recording of audio. If we record analog audio from the ear to a tape, for example, or a vinyl record, we are taking an actual physical thing, a sound wave, and we are imprinting it on an actual physical thing. A piece of wax, a vinyl record, a tape.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so it's a real thing, and we're capturing it on another real thing. And in that sense, when we play back an analog audio recording, we are listening to the actual sound.
Right, because the speakers will create the audio again by oscillating at a certain speed or whatever it is, which will create those waves, sound waves again.
Yes. And I'm glad you mentioned that term. That's an important one for us to consider, oscillation. If we come back to our wave form here.
It's also written on the notes.
Wow. So serendipitous that you should mention it. It's almost as if we're reading off the same note sheet here. But I don't imagine how that could have happened.
I do not know.
So oscillation is the idea. I'm going to actually back up a few steps here because when I drew that second sound wave, it complicated things unnecessarily. Oscillation is the idea that we go up and we come down. We go up and we come down. Not every kind of wave follows that pattern, but it is one of the quintessential properties of the sine wave, that oscillation, along with the repetition. It doesn't happen just one time. It goes on and on and on. What we're looking at here would be the equivalent of a split second, far less than 1 second of actual audio. It goes on and on and on for quite a while. And there's also a smoothness to a sine wave, which I did not do full justice to. But again, some waves, different kinds of waves, have a very jagged appearance to them. So they would look a little bit more like this, for example. And if you saw a wave like that, you would not consider it to be a sine wave. Now, as we're talking about these matters, we also have to consider that there are limitations.
Yes, and actually, about another interesting thing about, just one more quick thing about this sound, is that like when the digital, so the analog sound wave is converted to, binary, digital, and then if you're listening to it, it's actually converted back to audio, analog again.
It's a good point. Yeah, and in fact, that premise, if I'm not mistaken, could also be applied to photography. It could be applied to video.
The
digital technology that comes into play is kind of like a middleman.
Yes.
Everything starts off analog in the real world. It becomes digitized, and then it ends up again as an analog experience.
So when you're watching a projector,
beings, like you and me, we are analog creatures.
Yes.
And I venture to say that everyone in the class is also an analog being.
And we're watching a movie on the screen that is a projection of light, which is analog.
Yes. Yes, because our eyes are analog devices. And they're actually really impressive analog devices that in some ways surpass even the best digital technologies right now. Or at least give them a run for their money.
Yeah. Although supposedly the human eye actually has pretty low resolution.
But what about dynamic range?
Well, yes. Very, very good dynamic range.
And we're going to talk about these concepts.
Yeah.
Resolution, I think we all have an intuitive understanding of what resolution is. And one of the things we want to do today is really nail down a solid
So do you want to go back to
technical definition.
You?
Oh my goodness, the camera has not been on me for the last 2 or 3 minutes. That's a relief. Okay, thank you. Woo.
Yeah, because I've noticed, but it's 2:36.
2:36. My good man, we have to get a move on here.
Okay, so analog limitations.
Analog limitations. There are 4 limitations of analog technology. And these 4 limitations are the reason that digital technology exists. It's why people said, wait a minute, there's got to be a better way. It's the reason that we don't still have cassette deck Walkman.
Well, this may show my age a little bit, but I do remember as a child editing with VCRs. And I looked at, when I went back home, I looked at one of the movies I made of my dog and edited with a VCR, tape to tape, linear editing. Mm-hmm. And with a VCR movie camera, which was pretty archaic now, but it was pretty bad. The quality is so bad. I mean, when you watch a VCR movie, an old VCR, from a VCR tape, in standard definition, it looks pretty bad.
It does. It does. We've become quite spoiled
oh gosh, yes.
here in 2018 by the quality of media that we can see.
I mean, it's now even HD is, now it's HD will become the SD and then 4K, and now, but they're even working on 8K and 6K.
I will openly scoff at HD. You saw my reaction when you proposed streaming this at 720p.
Well.
But let me ask you something. Tell us about the first limitation.
Generation loss. Well, so actually this applies to digital also, but is it strictly referring to analog? So we're not talking about JPEG compression or anything like that?
Well, we're talking about the degradation when a copy is made.
Okay, so for example, every time you, with a VCR tape, analog material, every time you make another copy over that tape, then the actual tape, physical quality of the tape is being degraded more and more. And then so eventually it gets to the point where the tape is just literally degraded to the point where it's not even useful anymore.
And it's a precipitous decline, this generational idea. So generation loss simply means how far removed from the original are we? One copy removed, 2 copy removes. You go down 3, 4, 5 copies from the original, and the quality is abysmal, whether it's audio, a photo, or
because you're
video.
Making a copy of a copy. It's like a copy machine. If you make a copy of a copy and you keep making that, then it's going to keep copying those imperfections because it's already it's not better than the original, and then so you just lose you get that degradation going on.
Now, let me ask you a purely hypothetical question. Suppose again, purely hypothetical. Suppose I gave you a copy, an MP4. I make a copy of an MP4 file of The Hobbit for you to watch.
Okay.
Over the weekend. And you make a copy of that MP4 file, and you give it to your dad because he wants to watch it. And he makes a copy and he gives it to his neighbor. And his neighbor makes a copy and gives it to somebody else. So we're 4 or 5
but are we talking about analog or digital?
I'm talking about an MP4 file.
That's a digital
file.
So,
how much
now we're getting into.
Is that going to be from the original?
Well, it depends.
How so?
Well, it depends on the level of compression and.
No, I'm simply saying the copying process.
The actual.
How much quality is lost from one copy to the next? One digital copy to the next.
Just a copy.
Just a copy.
Oh.
Just a copy.
Okay, I see.
You see what I'm getting at here?
I was confused because I thought you were talking about making another MP4, an MP4 from that original MP4.
No, I was merely talking about the duplication.
Oh, well, then there would be absolutely no loss.
None at all. Would it be
well, if you're just copying a digital file?
That's what we're saying, yeah. So at the risk, again, of being hyperbolic, would it not be a exact replica of the original?
Yes.
It would be exactly the same. And that's not possible with analog technology.
Right.
There always will be some degradation. Not so with digital.
Right, exactly. Because you're just...
And this is hugely important. Because if it means we can copy it however many times, it means the idea can be shared that many times around the world and at relatively low cost and with, in some cases, no physical media involved. When you think about distribution possibilities, this is really, really significant.
Although I do remember also, this may show my age, as to when CDs first came out. You know, you'd go to the music store and there'd be half the store would be CDs and half the store would be cassette tapes. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And I remember at the time there was a little resistance against CDs because they sounded too, quote, pristine. And as a musician yourself, you are a musician. You know, what do you think about the vinyl? You know, some people talk about the quality of the vinyl, the analog quality. They like that analog vinyl quality.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, what do you think about that?
Well, one of my most prized possessions is my turntable. I still listen to vinyl records. There are some issues with them. One of them being another limitation on our list, which, in addition to generation loss, there's physical deterioration of the media. Every time you play an album, you play a record, you're damaging the physical material. And over time, it gets worn down, and the signal to noise ratio, which is the good to the bad, becomes less and less favorable. But they're absolutely...
And we want a high signal
We want a high
noise
signal to noise ratio.
Yes.
We want to keep that bad stuff tamped down and the good stuff prominent. But for sure, there is something really... people talk about the magic of analog audio, and it's a real thing because, as we were talking about a moment ago, analog audio is the actual sound. I mean, digital is magical, yes, but if you think about
the digital, when you're listening to speakers or anything, even these, headphones or something like that, I mean, it's producing an analog, it's just producing vibrations that we hear.
In other words, it's all analog.
It's all analog in the end.
This is such an important point, and we're going to come back to it in part 5, I think. Yes, 4 and 5, because there is a very important point here about a limitation in digital technology.
Okay, so it's 244. So do we want to...
Okay, so what else do we have in terms of limitations? Generation loss, physical degradation, which, by the way, is not exclusive to analog devices, right?
Right.
Digital recording device, SD cards, can sustain physical damage.
Yes, and they can fail.
They can fail. They can be destroyed.
Yeah.
So this is not just about, and the more you use them, the more prone they are to.
Yes.
To this
eventually.
Kind of
Yeah.
In fact, SD card manufacturers, I think, officially and technically say, well, you can use this for X number of times or hours, but after that, there's no guarantee that it's going to work anymore.
Yeah.
So you're supposed to periodically swap these cards out. And it's slow and expensive to copying. Well, I might reveal my own age here for a moment, but I remember high-speed dubbing being a very exciting innovation.
High-speed dubbing,
High-speed dubbing.
I remember working at USF Tampa, where they would doing the exact same thing we're doing. But this is with
at
VCR,
a much lower quality
with VHS,
level, sure.
VHS machines at a much lower quality, and you make multiple copies. And so you'd have a deck of VCRs, all these decks, and then you make multiple copies.
Yeah.
And then that was a big thing, kind of a thing. But you're right, it was slow because you'd have to play it, copy it at real time.
Real time, or if you're lucky,
And that's where high-speed dubbing came.
Yeah, we could do it like in half the time. But then high-speed dubbing was never the same quality. You lose a little quality when you try to speed up the process.
Yes.
And it's expensive and it's slow. So all of these terrible limitations. And then noise, analog. If you listen to an analog record, you're going to hear, with perhaps the exception of the very first time you play a vinyl record, it may sound very pristine. But after that, you're going to hear little pops.
Little clicks and pops.
Clicks and pops and blips and bops. And that's part of it. It's just part of the analog.
And if you watch a VHS tape, you're going to see a little bit of lines and
that's right.
things like that. Yeah.
The little wavy thing.
Wavy things, the more you get. Yeah.
So these are unique to analog, with the exception, I would say, of, noise can actually also happen with digital technology in a slightly different way.
Yes.
Physical degradation definitely can happen.
Hence the signal to noise ratio.
Slow, expensive copying, not so much with digital. That really does go a long way toward, now, a huge file, that 4K copy of The Hobbit that I would hypothetically perhaps copy and share with you, completely hypothetical, would take a little time to copy because it's going to be a big file.
Yeah, because file sizes have gotten so much bigger. I mean, back in the day, there was floppy disks that were remember those? You ever have those?
Yes.
1.44 megabytes.
1.44, yeah, the 3.5-inch floppy.
That was like, woo, wow, 1.44 megabytes.
I have even,
My gosh.
in my much younger days, when I could barely walk, I was 5.25-inch floppies.
Oh, the floppy, really floppy
The
ones.
you know,
The really floppy ones. That was kilobits, right?
that's right.
Yeah.
How far we have come. All right, let's come on to part 4.
Yes, because it's. Oh,
Well, okay, part 4. Digital basics. This is a really natural segue, actually. Now come back to me.
okay. That was all that work for that one little thing.
It's well worth it. Okay, so digital technology addresses most of the limitations of analog, as we just described, in various ways. But they add a really important new problem. And that thing I said was going to come up in parts 4, what did I say, 4 or 5? Here it is. This is so important. If you take nothing else from this thing that we're doing today, remember this. Digital, unlike analog, is a representation or a recreation of reality. And we always have to ask ourselves, how good is that representation? Now, the answer to that question manifests in different ways depending on what we're talking about. One kind of answer would be talking about the resolution of the photo or of the video, or the bit depth of the audio. So we have different ways of measuring the quality of the representation. But in the end, it's all about a representation. We can represent so many different things with digital technology. Words, no problem. Audio, video, photography. We know that we can represent both sound and light waves using these tools. But now here's where it gets a little philosophical. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to make a bold statement. And here it is.
Is it the last sentence?
All digital representations, I want to make sure I get this right, all digital representations fall short of reality.
Well, that's very philosophical,
That
because
is
then you'd have to
philosophical.
define reality. And how do you define reality? Because our very senses fall short of reality,
Why don't you ask the follow-up question?
which is what?
Right after that part I read. You
But
read
can
that.
we perceive the difference?
Can we perceive the difference?
So well, like for example, other species see reality in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Like
Don't flies see an infrared or something like that?
butterflies, I think, see in the UV spectrum and the infrared spectrum, and
Your background as a biologist
yes,
is very
yes.
handy.
Other species have much limited visual perception, so they see maybe just black, like dogs, just black and white, not color.
Bats can hear sonar, right?
Yeah,
Is that a hearing?
And super. Well, that's for vibrations, but that's more hearing. But so yeah, so it's but so maybe it should be all digital representations fall short of our senses.
But I'm not sure that that's the case, because I think the key here is to meet the threshold of what people can sense, and then just do a little bit better than that.
Ah, I see.
Because if you've
Yes.
passed the threshold of human perception, you have, for all intents and purposes, completely and thoroughly represented reality.
With how many shades of gray?
Yeah. Yeah. And so what's happened in the last, 40 years? With digital technologies, commercially, they started percolating in the late 80s, but certainly since the early 80s, digital technologies were being used in labs, and they were, Adobe was working it. So it's been at least 40 years.
But it's really not till the 90s, I think, when it really hit the consumer market,
And
when
went
consumers
mainstream
were using
in
it.
the 90s, yeah. Yeah, but it's been a while, and every step along the way, digital technology has gotten better and better, which really just comes down to the idea that it has gotten better at representing reality and meeting or even exceeding human perception.
Well, yes,
reality.
yeah, like, well, yeah. Some cameras now can actually see, cameras that see in the dark, infrared cameras and cameras that have night vision and things like that, or even cameras that, some of the Sony cameras that, you can turn up the. That's slightly not very accurate, but no, but it is interesting because in the 90s, I think, I worked at a photography studio, school photography studio. It was in 2003, and at the time, a professional DSLR, basically, what I'm, right now in the studio, I use the Nikon D810. Which is a 36 megapixel camera. And back in 2003, Nikon, the digital Nikon DSLR, it was a 3 megapixel camera.
Three.
And it was $25,000 for the body alone.
$25,000
just for the body.
Wow.
For a 3 megapixel, basically digital DSLR. Now you can get a Sony A7R III 42 megapixel camera, full frame, for $3,000 and change. So, yeah.
Still a lot of money, but when you consider what the purchasing power and what you get, it's pretty phenomenal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Resolutions of, you can see a huge difference when you look at a VHS to when you watch a VHS tape. I mean, that's not. It's analog, but still, or like an 8-bit video game. Or the video, like Atari.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have an Atari system?
I did.
So I remember how like Space Invaders and things like that.
Yeah.
And just how blocky it looked.
Yep. So these were early representations of reality.
Yes.
Confined by the technology at the time.
Yes.
And what the programmers who made those games did, considering the limitations they were working in, the amount of memory they had available to them, was incredible.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah, I mean,
they eked out every last bit of memory to make those games as interesting and engaging as possible. And in fact, some would argue that some of those games, Breakout, Warlords, Asteroids, they're timeless. They'll never go out of style.
Yeah, I loved Asteroids. I used to play it. Well, it was a great, that movie, that show, *Halt and Catch Fire*.
Yeah,
that's what's such a great show. It's a show on AMC. It's all about the. It's a series set about like a drama TV show, but the environment is it's set in the '80s, and it's a startup company, computer company.
Yeah,
and it's just really interesting because they're really accurate. Just the whole vibe about that computer technology back then.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was just like,
there's so many milestones along the way. We look back and it's so quaint, but like I remember when 256 colors was like a big deal.
Yeah, or when they hit the gigahertz clock speed.
Oh, the 1
CPUs.
gigahertz.
Yeah, because it was always megahertz. And then when gigahertz came out, that was like, oh my God, that's just so fast.
My first computer was a 25 megahertz IBM computer with 4 megabytes of memory. And it was I believe it was the first computer.
4 megabytes of memory.
4 megabytes of memory, and it had a CD-ROM drive.
Did it even have a hard drive? It had a hard drive.
It had a hard drive, yes it did.
Well, yes, 4 megabytes.
Yes, it did have a hard drive.
So.
All right, let's go to part 5 here.
Yeah, since it's... Actually, part 5 is a good segue.
I'm trying so hard to make this happen. There we go. Okay. It is a good segue. There's such a natural flow.
Since we were just talking about megabits and megabytes and gigahertz and et cetera, et cetera.
So the binary system. I'm sorry, I have to repeat my joke from earlier. Not to be confused with the Dewey Decimal System.
What, the card system? That's what they use in libraries, right? With the cards? You have the card catalog?
The card catalog, yes.
Yes.
Actually, the binary system is a lot more like Morse code. which is a kind of binary system. I think that the binary system is so incredibly interesting. It's a very basic concept, and it is the backbone of everything now. Every technology that we use is based off of this binary system. And it emerged from electrical engineering in many ways. So in electricity, in electrical systems, I don't know if we have any electricians among us, but if we do, you're well familiar that electricity can have two different states, on and off. And we can switch from one to the other. Well, binary takes that concept and it brings it into the digital realm. So rather than on and off, we talk about binary information in terms of ones and zeros. 0 being off and 1 being on. More complexity. In other words, a video in most cases is more complicated than a photo, and a photo is more complicated than text in most cases. More complexity requires more digits to represent it, but in the end, every video, photo, sound file, word, book, everything that's represented on a computer digitally can be boiled down to a series of ones and zeros. That is the binary system in essence. Now,
you're a programmer also.
I do a little dabbling in the code.
Well, you're a little more than dabbling. Professor Frechette is being very humble there. He's actually a very accomplished programmer. I'm somewhat jealous. I wish I had learned programming at an earlier age, but
it's never too late.
Well, yes, I would like to start, learning it again in my copious amounts of free time. But so this, so then a question is, what is the most basic language, or the most basic way that these ones and zeros are recorded?
Well, if we burrow down at the most basic level, which basically means we're getting very close to the physical hardware and the electrical circuits, we enter a realm known as machine code or machine language, which if you gave it to a person, it would be worse than hieroglyphics in terms of trying to understand it. It would essentially look like a series of ones and zeros. And the way that computer programming works is we have these are low-level languages, and then as we move further from that hardware and we enter the realm of things like programming for the web, we have high-level languages like JavaScript, which much more closely resemble English.
It's the highest level.
It would be considered one of the higher levels. I suppose there are some things even.
So what is assembly?
Assembly is a step above machine code or machine language. So it's also low level. Still very relevant. People who know this stuff, who know like assembly language, they're very rare and very valuable because we still need it. And the thing is, even these higher level programming languages like JavaScript, in the end, come back to ones and zeros. That part doesn't go away. So it's very true that programming is all built off of this binary system as well.
So what's this ASCII 2 encoding?
So ASCII is a way of encoding letters using binary. And that's so important because that allows us to represent text, which allows us to represent concepts with computers. And so if we wanted to represent the letter A, for example, using binary code as it's prescribed by the ASCII encoding scheme, we would say 0100000001 is an uppercase letter A, and there's a different code which is 01100001, and that's a lowercase a.
So just to give a time update, it's 3:06.
3:06. So imagine that. If we wanted to represent a single letter, which is probably the most simple concept, the most simple thing that we could represent in a digital sphere.
Oh, you don't have to be quiet. Edgardo's trying to be quiet, but you don't have to be quiet.
No, we're so past that, Edgardo.
We're so past that.
We are.
In fact, Edgardo's another expert programmer also.
Yes. Feel free to chime in here at any point.
We're talking
Edgardo.
about assembly
we have
and
just,
machine languages.
Yes, it's a scintillating
I'm sure
discussion
I'm sure he knows it.
about the ASCII encoding scheme. So, but imagine this: how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We need 8 digits in the ASCII coding scheme to represent a single character, letter, number, symbol. And that's as basic as it gets. Imagine how many ones and zeros we need to represent.
So that's 8. A byte is 8 bits.
Exactly. A bit is 1 piece of information. A byte is 8 bits. And that is not coincidental. A kilobyte is 1,000 bits.
Kilo. Hence the term 1,000.
I've got a megabyte, which is
Million.
a million bits. A gigabyte,
Billion.
a billion, and a terabyte.
Trillion.
Which is,
and then isn't there a pentabyte now?
Yeah, there is, and there's a Googa Jugabyte or something.
But aren't they even don't they even have petabyte hard drives now?
I don't know. On the consumer market?
No. But
At
I
the
thought they were
NSA?
working. What? I thought they were working on a pentabyte. That would be one. Oh wait, what would that be? 1 trillion trillion? No,
A trillion. What's more than a trillion? A quadrillion. Right?
quadrillion.
Yes. The system goes on and on and on. It takes so many ones and zeros to represent reality. But here's the cool thing. If we can represent a single letter or number, then the sky's the limit. Whoa. We can represent War and Peace, we can represent The Hobbit, and everything in between. All right, let's go to part 6. Part 6. It's digital audio.
Digital. Oh. Wait, hold on.
That was pretty good, actually. All right, digital audio. So, yes, it's all ones and
there you
zeros.
go.
Oh, hello. Yes, it's all ones and zeros, but every kind of information that we would represent with digital technology, there are some different properties that are unique to that kind of information. So audio, images, and video all have their own unique forms of measurement. In terms of audio, number 1 is something called a sample rate. Sample rate is the number of times per second that we are capturing information about audio. Let's come back because it's just so classic. Here's our sine wave. Ooh.
Yes.
In reality, that is in the analog world, this wave is continuous.
Wait, is it writing? Did it write?
Oh, I didn't actually. I hovered.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe it had frozen.
I made a hovering.
I thought maybe it had
swipe
frozen because digital technology always works perfectly.
perfectly. Yes.
Perfectly.
That's what it's known for.
Yes.
Perfection. So in an analog world, this is continuous. It is perfectly smooth and perfectly continuous. In a digital world, we're representing this wave with a series of samples, meaning every little stop along the way here is a sample. And so rather than having a smooth curve, it's more like, hopefully this is showing up, we have all of these individual samples representing that sound. And we can tell intuitively that the more of these individual samples we have, the more faithfully we will have represented or recreated the original sound wave. This gets back to the idea that more data means more reality. Each of these samples entails a number of ones and zeros, and we call these our sample rate, which is the number of these guys that we have per second in audio. And prepare to have your mind blown, but common sample rates in audio range from 44.1 kilohertz, that is 44,100 samples, to 48,000
Per
samples
second.
per
Second.
Second. My
So-
goodness, per second. Thousands and thousands of samples taken per second to accurately represent analog audio. That's what it takes. And every single one of those samples has any number of ones and zeros built into it. And the more ones and zeros we have, the greater the bit depth. So here's the other idea. As we move through time from left to right, and then eventually we hit a full second, and maybe there's 44,000 or 48,000 samples in there. We also have to consider each one of those samples, how exactly do we represent it? And that gets to the concept of the bit depth. The bit depth is the amount of information contained within each individual sample that places it where it should be on this approximation of our sine wave.
Or how precise the measurement is being recorded.
Precisely. It is how
The
precise
precision of the
measurement.
measurements.
So what are common bit depths? Well, do you have a few you'd like to share with us?
Yes. 8, 16, 24, and 32.
32 as
32 is a 32-bit floating point. The ones that are most common in video are 16 and 24, although I used to record, I used to record audio always at 48, well, you always do it at 48 kilohertz, although some people argue for 96, but there's also an argument that that's basically overkill, but it really depends on who you talk to. It seems like that's a very touchy subject. It's so I won't.
And if I'm not mistaken, we're getting back to that issue of what is the threshold of human perception?
Well, the threshold would be 44.1.
Now, is that not a theoretical threshold?
That is
though?
the Nyquist theory. Yes, that's
And
right.
some would say, well, no, there are people who can hear beyond.
Right, but 48 supposedly
20,000
is
hertz.
actually up to 20. But supposedly, unless you're like just born, you can't hear anything. You can't even hear 20,000 kilohertz. I mean, the only people that can hear 20,000 kilohertz are supposedly literally like kids and people like that.
In other words, we start dying the day we're
You
born.
start dying, your hearing starts dying the day you're born, basically. It's interesting. So it's interesting.
You
So
have a little
44.1.
hearing- You had
What?
a scare with your hearing fairly recently.
Yeah, because I made the mistake of when I was learning how to use that field mixer, I did the tone and it just,
At full volume.
the full volume, and
I
that
don't
was
mean to
very,
bring up
very
bad
bad.
memories, but
But actually, the most recent hearing test I had, basically, I have the hearing of basically like a 30-year-old or something like that. So
Wow.
I'm fine. But interestingly enough, 48 kilohertz is roughly translates into about 20 kilohertz. So theoretically, very few people could hear that. So theoretically, 44.1 is fine. But I think the whole principle of 96 kilohertz is that even though you may not notice the difference, the one argument that I hear that why to record at 96 is because it doesn't take up that much memory,
Yeah.
and also you just have more information to work with.
When you're
and then
editing.
so it's always better to have more to work with because you can when you're exporting the final project, whatever the audio or video, whatever it is, you're always going to export it generally at a lower setting. So like at 60, like at bit depth, generally you always hear a 16 bit depth, record video audio at with a 16 bit depth of 16. But now actually I record it at 24 because when you're exporting it, you're always going to export it at 16 bit. And supposedly that little 24 bit does make you have that little bit more information. You have more information initially to work with.
yeah, and I just want to underscore this because you're raising such an important point. The settings that we use when we're capturing digital recordings are oftentimes different and better than the settings we're using when
Yes.
we're exporting
Yes,
and
and this-
distributing.
This applies to any kind of digital capture. This is a very important point. It applies to audio, video. Like when you're taking a photo, usually you would capture the raw file. Oh my God! Wait.
What? Oh no! How long has it been? Hello.
See, that's why.
Now, actually, come back to that for a second because
Wait.
I want to point out that we are now talking about
Wait, what? No,
digital imagery.
we are.
Look at
Okay.
that! What a perfect segue.
So,
We are smooth operators. So
Okay, so now for those that are new to this, hopefully, it's the first one of the semester. So
it's all downhill from here.
it may not, hopefully that screen was not too terribly, but hopefully it was like a podcast, maybe.
We'll
so-
call it a podcast, yes.
But anyways, yeah. So now I record at 24-bit, and it's the same with digital with photos. So if you generally now you record the when you take an image, you take a photo, you take the raw file, you shoot raw,
Yep.
raw plus JPEG or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, now you can do raw plus JPEG. But when you shoot raw, then you have the ability then to export. You have the most amount of information initially to work with, and then you always are exporting it or you're compressing it, or is exporting it as a JPEG.
Yeah, because file size is a real thing.
Now, there is this huge, although some photographers, it's very interesting the level of, like on these channels, and I'm sure this is the same with audio or just any other kind of artist or professional field, is that some people get they get these large, huge debates about RAW versus JPEG, and should you shoot JPEG or should you shoot RAW or RAW plus JPEG? I mean, it gets quite intense sometimes in these
It's
back
like
and forth on these YouTube channels.
Coke or Pepsi,
It's crazy, but it's like people are just, it's like, whoa, come on, slow down. Anyway, so. Yeah.
So we measure audio primarily using samples. And we measure images primarily using pixels.
Yes.
So an image is made up of a bunch of itty-bitty pixels. When the concept of bit depth comes back into play, just like it does with audio, where that's the precision of each individual sample, the bit depth is the precision of each individual pixel. That is the number of possible values for any given pixel. And then the question becomes, well, how many of these pixels do we have? And that is the definition of resolution. I'm sorry, you were going to say.
Well, yeah, and then we're right. No, I was looking at color depth here, but
I sort of jumped ahead to that.
yeah, because that was
Resolution is the number of pixels going across horizontally, multiplied by the number of pixels going down vertically, oftentimes measured in megapixels. How many megapixels is your Nikon there? Your
the D810? Well, it's a 36 megapixel camera, so that's
36
how many
million pixels.
Yeah, so that'll be it's 7,000 something by 4,000 something.
Mm-hmm.
However that turns out to the width and the height, you would get something like you get something like that. So, but what's interesting is that a pixel is actually sometimes people get confused about DPI and PPI and pixels.
Yes. Yeah, because a pixel is a concept.
Yes,
A pixel doesn't have a physical.
No.
This is not the actual size of a pixel, nor is this. It all depends on the device that's representing the pixel. And this brings us to the idea of like a DPI or a PPI, a dot or a pixel per inch. So we've come up with the convention for measuring how packed in the pixels
So, I mean,
are.
like in Photoshop, PPI refers pixels per inch, which refers when you're printing something out. But on a monitor, it's completely the PPI doesn't matter at all. The dots per inch really doesn't matter
on a monitor.
on a monitor.
Well, except in the sense that, so Apple, their marketing sleuths came up with this concept of the Retina display, which is a fancy way of saying that they've crammed in so many pixels into the same physical space.
But they still have so many pixels wide by so many pixels high, right?
Yes. Well, in the end, you can always measure what the resolution is.
Right.
But the key thing here is if we have a given resolution, let's just say 7,000 by 4,000, is that good or bad? I have no idea because I don't know what I'm looking at it on. If I look at that on my phone, it's going to look amazing because we're cramming all that information into a tiny space. If I take 7,000 by 4,000 and I project it onto a 80-foot display and I'm standing right in front of it, it may not look that good. I may notice all kinds of imperfections.
Yes.
Just saying.
So, like, there's we just got new computers with the 5K Retina display, so 5K, and it does look quite nice. But it's interesting. There's viewing distance also comes into play with these resolutions,
which comes back to the concept of human perception.
Yes. So you can have a billboard that can have a low resolution because you're looking at it so far away, but if you get up close to the billboard, then it's going to look very pixelated.
That's right. We're doing well, actually.
Really? Yeah.
Because we're touching on all the highlights, but we're going to come to.
But that is something that is confusing to people, and it takes a little bit of time.
And maybe we did rush
for video.
Yes.
For video, all you have to worry about are the pixels.
What do you mean?
The dimensions, the width and the height.
Okay.
So within Photoshop or Lightroom or something like that, if you want to export something from the raw file, and there's that the width and height, and then there's the size, and then there's the resolution, and the DPI,
yes.
the PPI. That can be anything. It really doesn't matter. All that matters really is, for the video resolution, is the width and the height for images. Which, yes. This is a lot to take in for people.
It is a lot to take in, and I feel that we have gone a bit quickly. But on the other hand, one could pause, one could rewind and replay the experience. Perhaps we'll link up some supplemental resources as well to provide full depth and coverage.
Either that, or they may just say this is all silly and turn it off.
That's another possibility. Yes, that would be ill-advised. We're almost done.
Yeah. Oh, yep. Part 8.
Part 8. Let's go to
Oh, wait. Hold on. Let me get. Okay. There you go.
Oh, there it is. Part 8. Digital video.
Well, the problem is I have 4 monitors, and the mouse goes across all 4 monitors. So sometimes I don't know where the mouse is.
That is the epitome of a humble brag, my good man.
Now there's a 5th monitor with the Mac here.
Are you not traversing to your 5th monitor?
No, but it's still there's still 4, but sometimes you can't find the mouse.
Yeah.
Anyways.
There's problems. Multiple
Yeah, I really
problems.
shouldn't complain. It's not a bad problem to have, I suppose.
All right, digital video. A couple of additional measurement schemes that we need to bring into the works here. In digital video, we have a concept called the frame rate, which is sort of like a sample rate for audio. It's the number of times per second, not that we're sampling the sound, but that we are representing a moving image. And as I think we all understand now, video is an illusion. In the same way that all digital technology is an illusion. It's not actual motion. It's a series of still images played back in rapid succession, as measured by the frames per second, to create the illusion of movement. In other words, it's nothing more than an old-fashioned flip book of a horse trotting. Unless you'd like to add anything to that.
Well, horse trotting, actually supposedly the first motion, one of the first motion pictures of moving of an animal, where the study was of a horse, and they were doing a study to see if horses actually raise their feet completely off the ground. It was in the 20s or something. Muybridge doing a study on that. It was one of the first movies of a animal.
That was one of the pressing questions of the day.
I can't remember the exact date.
Are their feet ever
I can't remember the
completely off
exact
the ground?
date. I'd have to look in a film book. Went down there.
Well, see, I'm sure what happened was somebody had a flip book of a horse, and they said, you know what? Let's make a movie.
Yes.
All right, so what are some common frame rates? Well, 24 frames per second.
So why did you write down 15?
You know why? I was going back in time to my younger days as a multimedia developer at the University of New Mexico in 2000 when we were producing multimedia lessons online.
Did you run into Walter White?
No, our paths did not cross.
Or Tuco?
Saw Tuco a couple times. Scary dude. Well, back then, when we were putting videos online...
These are all Breaking Bad references. Hopefully everyone understands that.
Oh, I trust that they do.
Well, I don't know. There may be some people that have not seen Breaking Bad.
Well, we'll find out. This would be another conversation for the Course Cafe.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
yeah.
Life. You haven't lived life until you've seen at least one episode of Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul.
I would agree. I would agree with that. Well, anyway, back in the early days of the internet... we would post videos at 12 or 15 frames per second.
Videos,
yeah.
Oh. Well, supposedly early movies in the 1900s were hand cranked at 15 or 12 frames per second.
Yeah.
So that's why they appear very fast and jerky.
Yeah, because of the sped up. But
Yeah.
the problem is, again, human perception. If you slow it down too much, if you only have 12 or 15 frames per second, it's not going to appear fluid.
Right, because you're missing that motion.
You're missing the motion, and humans can detect that difference.
And that's why, looking on this list, 60 frames per second appears hyper-realistic because you're recording more motion within 1 second.
And it's a little different from what our eyes can actually do. Now, aardvarks, I don't know, maybe they're perceiving the world at 60 frames per second.
Well, supposedly
so
we
for
perceive
them
it at,
be-
I can't remember, it's not 24, it's 60 or 48 or something like that. Somewhere around there, but it's not 24.
Not 24, no.
No.
But we've become accustomed to that because it's been that way in film for so
And that was just an arbitrary
very
number
long
that was
now.
decided upon.
Now, if we go up to really high frame rates, like 120, 240 frames per second, there are specialty cameras. Very expensive specialty cameras. More expensive than that 3 megabyte
3
camera.
megabyte?
that you were
Oh,
talking
the
about.
Kodak DCS 620 it was.
Was that what it was?
Yeah, it
Yes.
was
Well,
back
there
when
are these-
Kodak was still around.
Oh, yes. Well, I think
Well, they're
making a
still
comeback.
around, but back when they made cameras.
There are specialty cameras, though, that record at thousands of frames per
Yes,
second.
yeah, like the
And-
Phantoms and these other cameras.
And why? Well, because like certain things, like a bullet traveling through space is so fast, but with the really,
And why would you want to record at such high frame rates?
Well, you slow it down, and then you could have a really, really beautiful, smooth slow-mo effect. All right, so moving along.
But that's done in post, which is something that
is
a
done
lot
in
of people
post.
don't. They have to understand
That
is that
is
you
done.
shoot at a high frame rate and then you change the frame rate in the editor in
Right.
post, and then you get that smooth slow motion effect.
Yep. Now, interesting thing. A lot of times now, the phone, the latest Galaxy or the latest iPhone,
Or even the not latest iPhone.
or even the not latest, have some advanced features that you couldn't even find on the D810. Like you can shoot at, what is it, 240 frames per second?
I think the Galaxy S5. I think. Edgardo, doesn't your Galaxy S5 shoot at 240 frames per second?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Oh, I thought it did.
I just want to say Edgardo has been officially recorded. Right?
I don't know if
Production
his
class.
voice was
It's a
picked up or
milestone.
not.
What we're very proud of here. All right, but anyway, the point being that our phones, in some ways, are leapfrogging ahead of really fancy, high-end professional equipment, in some regards, anyway. 4K footage, not on this phone, but on other phones out there, probably Edgardo's phone, and so on and so forth. Final thing, and we're wrapping up this minute. Within a minute, we're going to
Within
wrap
a
up.
minute. Oh, yes.
Yeah, because we're going to bop upstairs, and the teaching shall continue in a different format. But compression. Compression is a big topic, and we're just going to briefly say a few things about it here. There
is a big topic.
Two kinds of compression, but the idea is the same. To start with all kinds of data, ones and zeros, big file sizes, and to trim it down to a manageable size because we want to be able to distribute our content, stream our content, and you can't do that if you're sharing raw photos, log video. It's not going to work, so it has to be compressed. Two kinds of compression, lossy and lossless. Lossless compression is ingenious, and it uses some really cool techniques to remove ones and zeros without removing any actual data. There are lossless audio codecs like FLAC, which is better than it sounds.
And isn't OMG another lossless? Or is that a lousy?
OGG?
OGG.
OGG? I think it's both, actually.
There's AAC, and that's lossless. Or no, is that lossy? No, that's lossy. Yes.
MP3 is a lossy compression format. Wave is not compressed at all. It's like raw. It's raw. It's just what it is. But then we don't distribute wave. We compress it using a lossy or lossless format. Again, it comes back to human perception.
AAC, generally speaking, if you're using a Premiere on the Windows machine.
Yes. And so we use different codecs to compress, that's the co part, and decompress, that's the dec part. Because if you compress something, you have to then uncompress it. And that's done in the playback portion. So, thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go to the, wait.
Do we have a outro?